This is Autoline This Week, the show that gets you inside the global automotive industry. Autoline This Week partnered with the Consulate General of Canada in Detroit to produce this episode.
Hi, I'm John McElroy. Thanks for joining us on Autoline This Week. Today, the talk is going to be all about auto shows. How effective are they? I mean, there's been all this talk that they've been losing all kind of their panache, but we've got some interesting research here from Foresight Research that says opposite, that auto shows are actually very effective when it comes to the public. We've got Steve Bruyn. He's the CEO of Foresight Research. And I'm also joined today by Bruyn Armstead, who is a freelance journalist, also a North American Car and Truck of the Year journalist, and Mark Phelan, the car critic from the Detroit Free Press. Great to have you all here. Steve, let me throw it right out to you. There has been a lot of report that the media has been losing interest in auto shows. A number of car companies seem to have dropped out of most of them, but your research shows the public's still very interested in these.
It's true. It seems that there's a lot of questioning that goes on about the value of auto shows from the OEMs and from the press, and the consumer disagrees. The consumer still considers the auto show to be an important part of the shopping experience when they're in the market to buy a new car or truck. So in 2019, of course, some of the car companies decided to pull out of auto shows. Namely, that was BMW, Audi, and Mercedes-Benz, but it's been since followed by other brands, frequently luxury brands. Interestingly and ironically, though, luxury buyers attend auto shows at a disproportionate share compared to the population. So, in other words, there's a lot of luxury buyers at auto shows, even though a number of the luxury brands have pulled out of auto shows. So they're really missing a bet.
Yeah, Bruyn, I'm sure you got a question.
Yeah, fascinating research in your report. I am an auto show junkie, and I don't mean from a media perspective. I get really juiced up every year when I get to go and touch all of the cars at once. You know, as an automotive writer, we touch a car for a couple of days or a week, and we go to these press launches. But it's really good to get the pulse of the community when you go to these shows. I went to the Washington Auto Show this year and the Baltimore Auto Show this year, and they were both packed. I mean, even during the Omicron, the surge in COVID had gone down a little bit, but you could see the enthusiasm in people getting behind the wheel of cars, you know, driving a Jeep or a Land Rover on a course in the convention center. So, you know, I don't know what's up with the manufacturers in media days, but I agree with the report. What I see, you know, particularly on the Eastern Seaboard, the Philly show is popular, the Miami show is popular. Still a strong demand for people who want to go out and touch all of the new cars and trucks, particularly with all these EVs coming. They want to know what's going on. They want to learn about the new technologies.
Well, you're quite right, Bruyn. You're exactly right. Auto shows deliver an experience that is not available to a buyer in any other place with the exception of the dealership itself. But I mean, a lot of the other communications are important and they certainly work in conjoint, but auto shows are an experiential event and people go in big numbers. And we've been measuring attendance for 10 years or so, and about 7 million people, 7 million households go to auto shows every year, and that translates to 11 million people. Importantly, of that group, 70% of them are 12-month intenders. So if there's 7 million...
Explain it. What do you mean 12-month intenders?
They're in the market to buy a car in the next 12 months. And we've done measures and follow-ups and say, okay, you said you were a 12-month tender. Did you actually do it? And the answer is yes, overwhelmingly. And the thing is that people go to auto shows way up front from their planned purchase. They might have a lease coming up in November, all right? And they may go to an auto show in March. Why? Because the auto show is available in their market at that time. They know they're planning to get a new car or truck. And they've shopped frequently a month in advance, a year in advance, and sometimes even more than that. But we cut it off at a year. People plan ahead in this thing. And luxury buyers are there in a disproportionate group. So the luxury brands pulling out is really really quite questionable. But in any event, many have, as you know.
And that's something I wanted to follow up with you on, Steve, because as journalists, we obsess about the auto shows, the big leading national ones where the automakers have their own stands and they come in and have press conferences. And that has diminished drastically as they find other ways to introduce new vehicles to us. But at most auto shows, it's the local dealers that exhibit. So as your folks go to almost 60 shows a year, if I recall correctly, do they see a lower participation by luxury brands when it's the local dealers that would be participating as well? Are the luxury brands absent in a lot of shows, or is it or not?
They are absent in a lot of shows. And basically the way it breaks out is you look at the big shows, the ones that get all the visibility, New York, Los Angeles, Detroit, Chicago, they count for about 15% of the attendance. The lion's share is regional auto shows. It's the Miamis, it's the Phoenixes, it's even smaller markets like Buffalo, for example. And people attend in roughly the same proportion as the big auto shows, with one exception, Detroit, because Detroit over the years has drawn a lot of people from out of the market. People will come from all over the Midwest to go to the Detroit show. So that's kind of an anomaly, but the rate of attendance is about the same in market after market after market, even among the very small shows. That's a little bit lower, but it's still there. Why is that the case? Because people are there basically to shop for the vehicle. That's the basic attraction. And along with the product specialists and the folks that are there to answer questions, as well as a lot of the electronics that are available today, kiosks and so forth. But that's why they're there, to shop for a vehicle. And most vehicles are there in representative samples. I mean, probably not every color, not every brand, but a lot is there. And you can, in one room, you can see a lot of different brands and cross-consider brands and compare them and so forth and so on. And people spend typically about 4 hours a day doing just that, regardless of the size of the show.
And it's beginning to look like we may be edging back toward a more normal way of doing things. The Chicago Auto Show happened a couple of weeks ago. Do you have any insight into how that looked versus pre-pandemic years?
Yeah, we were there and we've measured it, and it's in data processing at the moment. We'll know the answer to those questions in about 2 weeks.
Hey, Steve, a question for you. As you know, the Washington Auto Show has a legislative component to it because of Capitol Hill being the backyard of the Washington, D.C. Convention Center. Has there been any push by the Biden administration with their Build Back Better plan and the amount of money that they pledged to put aside for EV infrastructure? Has there been any kind of feedback or input from the Biden administration towards auto shows to get people out to see these EVs so perhaps they can make the Build Back Better plan push a little smoother through Congress?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I don't know of anything coming from the Biden administration on that point, but I can tell you that auto shows play a really critical role in hybrids and BEVs. And we've been measuring that for the last couple of years. I mean, since it's become an issue, obviously the car companies are spending enormous amounts of money to develop these products, and to go along with the engineering and the product development, you need to educate the public, and it's a critical component. And when we look at auto shows, we've questioned what the role is for auto shows in that process. And auto shows look to us to be an extremely effective way of getting the word across. Obviously, the ride and drives that will occur with BEVs is going to be really exciting stuff. But the people who are attending auto shows are into this. I'll give you some numbers here. 43% of the people who are at auto shows own a hybrid or a BEV. That's double what the incidence is in the markets. 47% of the people there say we're very knowledgeable about BEVs and hybrids, and 79% will consider one for their next purchase. 79%. 84% say, oh, by the way, I learned something that I didn't know about electrics. And 73% say that the auto show has given me a lot of information about electrics and has had a role in my consideration of electric. So, and I know Washington, you bring up Washington, I know they have done, along with other auto shows, they've had special displays about electrics, and that's been pretty effective. There's a lot of people, an awful lot of interest in this subject, but there's also a lot of knowledge that needs to be passed along the road that to make this successful. I believe it will be, but it doesn't happen automatically.
Steve, that's fascinating what you're saying here. I mean, the auto industry has definitely got to ramp up sales of electric cars. I mean, they're under the gun to do that, not just in the US, the world over. If you could advise automakers of how they could use auto shows to educate the public on this, are there any specific things that you could give us?
I don't have it with me, but I can say this, just from generally speaking. An awful lot of information is obviously available digitally, and people use that all the time. When it comes to television, television doesn't communicate a lot. It'll communicate imagery, it certainly has reach, and it will show you what a car looks like inside and out. Basically, that's about it. And if there's some kind of an incentive involved, they can communicate that. But that's a bit about it for TV. Digital gets into far more of the weeds of getting knowledge across to the customer. The auto show then brings to the party the experience. They can see the car, they can sit in the car, they can understand that the electrics, in terms of creature features and in terms of the interior environment and so forth, are very similar. Mm-hmm. They can, of course, get statistics on performance, but on the digital or on the internet, but they can't get the experience of it. And when ride and drives are being conducted, that's a really tremendous way for people to experience an electric vehicle, generally for the first time. So auto shows brings what it has always brought, right from when they started in 1900. They show people they offer the experience to the consumer is the point, whether it's fossil fuels or whether it's electric. It's the same thing. And this is really important with BEVs, especially because it's new. It's new to a lot of people. Most people have never seen one.
And to that point, one of the things that the organizers of big auto shows tell us journalists is that automakers want more experiential things. They want to get people into vehicles. They want to drive around, hear them, feel them. Are you seeing that as a big part of what we can expect in auto shows going forward? And is there an educational component that's important? Because while it sounds like a lot of the people currently going to auto shows know quite a bit about electric vehicles, my emails suggest to me that most of the country really has very little understanding of them. So is that part of the role for auto shows going forward too?
And sure. Just to quickly add on to Mark's point, do we see a chasm in EV education between the coasts? I mean, what about the middle of the country? How have they bought into this technology?
I don't know that it's geographically located. It may be, but I don't know that. But I do know this. There's a great deal of interest in electrics, and it's obviously very visible. It's a current topic of conversation in the media a lot. People are getting exposed to it. They're aware that it's coming. And this is the place to showcase it. And it's very straightforward. It's always been the same thing. What people want is the vehicle that they're interested in front of them at the show so that they can see what it is. They may have heard about Tesla and they say, well, gee, I'd really like to see one. And if you can drive one, so much the better. But it's the same old thing. I want to get in the vehicle. I want to talk to a product specialist who can explain things to me. I can find out what this is going to cost. And ultimately, if you can drive one, that's sensational. It's really good. But yeah, this is a tremendous opportunity for OEMs to really get involved with electrics.
Hey, Steve, a question about the chip shortage. People go to a show, they see the car they want, and maybe they have to place an order for it or wait, a couple of months to get deliveries. Any feedback on how the chip shortage has impacted consumer expectations when they go to the auto shows in any capacity?
Well, what we find, Brian, is that people go to auto shows way in advance of the purchase.
Okay.
And they may be in the market for 2023, for example, but they're going now. So whether the chip shortage will continue into 2023 and beyond, we'll see. But they do shop well in advance, so that it's not to say that the chip shortage doesn't play a role. It certainly does. But it does say that the auto show mitigates it to some extent because people are shopping way in advance.
Do you have an expectation for what we'll see on the auto show circuit this year? I mean, in a normal year, there's maybe 55. Do you think we'll be close to that again?
I think so. Some shows have canceled for the remainder of the season, but it's limited. It's been half a dozen or a dozen shows I think were canceled or thereabouts. And I have to believe that next year is going to be a totally different matter. I can't imagine why we wouldn't return to pre-pandemic experiences in auto shows in terms of attendance and interest. And the reason I say that is one of the things we do is we ask people, among those people who didn't attend an auto show, why not? And generally it's because they weren't aware of the auto show, it conflicted with their calendar, or they're not in the market, or they're not interested. I mean, it's one of those four things. When the pandemic came along, the reason for non-attendance was 80% COVID. It wasn't all of the other matters that people say, well, the auto show is no good anymore, the brands are not there, and all of those kinds of things. It's just not true. There has been somewhat of a drop in luxury buyers at auto shows because luxury brands have not been there many times. But in terms of women, in terms of minorities, and in terms of youth, all of those groups are actually up over the last few years, and I think they'll continue.
Yeah, Steve, can we go into more detail on that? Because I was fascinated to find the demographics that you guys uncovered in your research. Not at all what I think the public perception, or certainly my perception of auto shows has been.
Well, sure. First of all, youth attends in a disproportionate high share. Why is that? I'm a first-time buyer, for example. So this is all new to me. And the auto show's coming to town, and I'm going to go and find out about whatever I'm interested in. Conversely, older people have a lot of experience and frequent brand loyalty, so they tend not to attend as often as youth does. When it comes to minorities, minorities seem to shop a little bit differently. They involve a lot of people, and I don't think it matters whether it's African American or it's Latino. The minorities tend to involve more people in the purchase decision. So we see them going to auto shows, not one or two people in a household, frequently three or four. And again, it's about first-time buyers, and it's about general interest, and there seems to be a real camaraderie that exists in that group, and so they're attending, and they're increasing because they're increasingly important in the new car market, as you know.
Just to let you know, I fielded over 100 calls after the Washington Auto Show. People went to the show, and then they wanted validation from me because they see my Facebook posts and they know that I've been in this business for a long time. So it was just a staggering number of calls this year, the most calls I've ever received after an auto show in my career. So your point is well taken.
So that's what we find. And of course, when it comes to women, obviously women are increasingly important, very important, but increasingly so. in the purchase decision. So they too are attending auto shows. And
yeah, in fact, your research here showed almost 50% or about 50% of the attendees are female. Almost 50% are 35 years old or younger.
Yeah.
I mean, that's extraordinary. Do you think part of it is women? I mean, this is what I hear from women. They feel intimidated in many cases going to a dealership. Isn't
I think that's
an auto show a better way of them being able to figure out what's in the market and what they want to buy?
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, this is an environment where there is no sales pressure by design. And they can compare all of the different cars and trucks that are, because even in the smaller regional shows, there's a lot of vehicles there. And they can talk to people who are knowledgeable. And you're right, the intimidation that they may experience in a dealership is by design, is they do not experience at an auto show. Interestingly, I think it was 3 years ago in Chicago, the women actually outnumbered the men, if you can believe that. That's not been very typical, but that was true a couple of years ago. But I think you're right. I think it's the experience. It's a very friendly environment.
Steve, have you had a chance to talk to your information about the luxury component of the auto shows is fascinating. Have you had a chance to sit down with any of the manufacturers to find out why they pulled out of the shows, given the data that you presented today?
We have, sure. And there's a combination of things, I think. On the one hand, it's cost. I think that when the press days became at auto shows became less important, there was a general feeling that was also true of the consumer days, which is not the case. But there was a general perception that was the case. In more recent times, of course, the chip shortage, one of the arguments is simply that, we're not having any trouble selling them, we're having trouble building them. And so why should we be spending a lot of money on auto shows? The answer to that one is, don't you know that the chip shortage will come to an end at some point or be alleviated at some point? And auto shows not only communicate shopping, they also communicate brand image and a whole lot of other things that play into the emotional side of the purchase decision. But basically, I think it's cost, and it's the chip shortage, and it's an incorrect perception that consumer days have become less important as press days have become less important. That's not the case.
In fact, what your research shows is that those luxury brands are probably using the wrong metrics. They're looking at what kind of media coverage they're getting. They're looking at what kind of social media is out there. And you're saying, forget the media, focus on the attendees, the actual car buying public.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we've always been in that boat that you really need to understand the attendee at auto shows. If you're going to be involved in auto shows, you need to understand it. We do a buyer study the following year after the auto show season is over and people have had a time to purchase the vehicle, which is, as you know, a lengthy process frequently. And we have found year after year after year after year, 20% of the buyers say that they went to the auto show and it influenced their purchase. 1 out of 5. I mean, that's a staggering number in my mind.
Yeah.
So what's the next auto show that is on your radar screen this year as a barometer of what to expect going forward?
Well, we'll be at the New York show, which is coming up in April. We're just coming back from Chicago, and we'll be at New York. But we'll be measuring the other shows in between, the regional shows. We may not be there, but what we do is the day following the auto show closure, if the auto show closes on Sunday, Monday, we are interviewing in the market and asking people if they went to the auto show and if they did, a lot of information about what their experience was and what their perceptions were and how important is the auto show in your shopping experience. And those people that don't go, we measure why you didn't do that, especially among the 12-month attenders. But we that's how we do that. And we'll be measuring all of the auto shows that are open through the end of the season. But we'll be on site in New York.
So that's when on Sunday, buy on Monday, right?
I beg your pardon?
Win on Sunday, buy on Monday, right?
No, interview on Monday. Yeah.
Well, and you've been gathering data on those metrics for about 10 years, I think you said. Is that about right?
Probably a little longer than that now. I think it goes back to something like.
Have you? Go on.
I think we started somewhere around 2005, so about 15 years.
Okay. So have you seen any significant change in the number of people who are looking to go to shows, or the reasons they go to shows in that period, or are the figures you've been giving us relatively steady throughout that period?
Steve, stable. We need a fairly quick answer. We're down to the very end here.
Very stable, both in terms of attendance and effects and ROI.
Thank you.
So I guess the takeaway from this is auto shows are still very powerful means of being able to reach the public and sell new cars. And anybody who's overlooking them is missing out from a manufacturer's standpoint.
I would agree with that, yes.
Steve Bruyn, thanks so much for coming in and sharing your research findings on auto shows. Mark Phelan from the Free Press, Brian Armstead as well. Thank you for your questions and in participating in this discussion. And of course, I want to thank everybody else who was tuned in.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Autoline This Week partnered with the Consulate General of Canada in Detroit to produce this episode.